I'm Jamie Fairchild, and I'd like to welcome you to a tour of my garden. So I'm going to start talking about some of the plants in the garden and share with you mostly information about the plants with the wildlife value. I have a few other things in here, but let's talk about wildlife value plants. And first of all is this bed of Ligularias, which I actually expanded. I took the opportunity to expand it after the freeze because I just adore them. They're a great shade plant. They are not native to this area. They are native to Asia, but they do so well here, and they do provide pollinator benefit in the late fall to early winter. And very soon, these Ligularias are going to get a tall bloom stalk that comes out about this high. And at the top of that bloom stalk are going to be these beautiful yellow flowers. They're in the sunflower family, so they kind of look like small yellow sunflowers, and they provide a lot of pollen and nectar to the pollinators. So even though they're not native, they do very well here. And of course, because of all my trees, I need things that'll do well in shade. And over here, in these two beds, these are my annual beds, but I've got things in them that have been coming back every year. And I love keeping the pentas in here because the hummingbirds and the pollinators, the butterflies, the bees, the hummingbirds, they all love the pentas. And the pentas also do extremely well. They are getting some sun now because I took a tree out over here in January. But they do extremely well, and I see pollinators all over the pentas all the time. So over in this section of the garden, I've got a lot of native Turks Cap. It's just loaded with native Turks Cap. And you can see in the back there the tall tubular flowers. That is a fire spike. The native Turks Cap are just a magnet for pollinators. And the hummingbirds have been putting on a show for us. This morning, I probably scared them away because I'm standing here. But the hummingbirds are all over my garden, particularly during migration. I see many hummingbirds in here fighting with each other to get to the nectar. And this is a fantastic shade plant. Once again, I am getting some sun here because I took out this tree, but it's a fantastic shade plant. And the same with the fire spike. The fire spike is actually native to more Central and South America, but it does extremely well here. And it's a great nectar plant and pollinator plant. So also just, oh, there went a grasshopper. Also, just to mention on these, they do spread, which I think is fantastic because they've filled up this bed beautifully and they're really easy to care for. So in this section of the garden, I've got coral berries lining the front of the bed here. The coral berry is a lovely native plant. Mine look a little ratty right now. Unfortunately, they kind of tend to look that way in the fall. But in the spring, these were the very first plant to come back after the freeze, and they just looked beautiful. They get covered in teeny tiny little flowers. The pollinators love them. And then at the end of the season, those flowers turn to berries, which are also good for the birds. So I have seen this plant at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, and they put it as a ground cover underneath trees. And frankly, I think that's a better use for this plant as opposed to a border, because like I said, in the fall, it does look a little dingy. But underneath trees as a large ground cover, this would work extremely well. And over here is my Hamelia that I did not plant. I think the birds must have planted this one for me, but I let it grow, and once again, it's doing beautifully. I thought it died after the freeze, but it came back, and it's another plant that the pollinators love, and it attracts the hummingbirds. Okay, so in this area of the garden, I have shrimp plant, which is another plant that can tolerate some shade, and it tends to bloom. It's just starting to bloom right now, and it tends to bloom later in the season, which is great once again because it provides that pollen and nectar for pollinators later in the season. And this will bloom throughout the winter, and so the hummingbirds will come to it throughout the winter, which is great. I used to have about half of this bed was shrimp plant and about half was Turks Cap, but the Turks Cap obviously is more aggressive, and it has almost taken over, which I'm kind of okay. I've let it do that. But just so you know, the Turks Cap will keep spreading, and it has kind of taken over the shrimp plant, but it's a great plant for the shade and great for pollinators. And over here, these big tall ones, those are my oak leaf hydrangeas, and they've only been in there about 3 years. We put those in, and these are actually native to the eastern United States, from the East Coast all the way over to Louisiana, but they still do really well in this area. Obviously, they've gotten very big, and these flower heads here, in the spring, those come up and those bloom, and they are white in the spring. So it's very pretty in the spring. It blooms white, and once again, it's great for the pollinators. Okay, this is my side bed, which I was able to put in, I don't know, about 10 or 12 years ago. This used to be all St. Augustine grass, and I wanted a bed over here for the longest time. And my husband resisted because he didn't want to spend the money. But then my neighbor across the street moved away, and she gave me some big pots of tropical plants. And I don't like to take care of pots because they're too much trouble. So he loves tropical plants, so he agreed to put in this bed so that we had somewhere to put the tropical plants. So we put the tropical plants in here, and they grew like crazy. And over the years, the more I learned about native plants, the more I wanted to transition this bed into a native bed. So when the freeze happened earlier this year, I was thrilled because it killed the tropicals, and we got to take them all out. And so now I'm doing a lot of experimenting in this bed. But so one of my new plants here is my red porterweed, which everyone knows porterweed is native and great for the pollinators. So there's a red porterweed there. This actually has been here for a long time, and this is a giant Turks Cap, or Mexican Turks Cap, some people call it. It gets these big red flowers, and as you can see, it's just starting to bloom. So this is another plant that it does well in the shade, but it also blooms through the winter. So this is providing nectar, and I see the hummingbirds and bees and all kinds of good guys come to this in the winter, and it provides a food source for them in the winter. And it does grow very big, and it does spread, so you do have to keep it under control, but great shade plant, great pollinator plant that will provide nectar through the winter. So this is one of my new plants that I've been wanting for ages, and it's doing very well here. When I first planted it in the spring, it was just a little stick. This is my button bush, and I know this is a fabulous pollinator plant, and it will provide nectar and pollen in the spring with the cute little white, round, fuzzy, buttony flowers. And so I'm really excited about next spring and hoping that this will bloom. Oh, behind me I have another fire spike, and this one is a hot pink fire spike. The other one is red. And over here is my Liatris, and I have another little one down here. This one I planted 2 years ago, and it didn't do very well for the first year, but this year it has just gone crazy, and it was so gorgeous when it had all the purple blooms on it earlier in the summer. So I'm very pleased that this is doing well, and I think it's doing well because I took this tree out right here. There was another tree here. Oh, there's a little hummingbird in the salvias right now. So this is another plant that I put in the spring here. This is my Texas star hibiscus, and it's been blooming. I don't know if there's any more blooms. I think, well, one just finished. Yeah, it's going to get some more blooms on it. Gorgeous big red flowers, native. It's an attention getter. Everyone that sees the garden gravitates towards this plant and says, wow, that's so pretty. So this is another great native for pollinators. And I don't know if you noticed, but I've got milkweeds popping up all over. I had more of them over there. These are all the tropical milkweeds that are popping up all over the garden. I let them grow wherever they want to grow. The seed pods, when they open, and the seeds float all around, and wherever they land, if the milkweed is happy there, I let it grow there, because that's what we're here for, right? We're here for the caterpillars and the pollinators. So the milkweeds get to grow wherever they want. And just real quick back here, this Turks Cap back here, this native Turks Cap, I did not plant that. It's another volunteer. I don't know how it got there. I'm assuming a bird. But anyway, it's growing there and it's doing very nicely. So I love my Turks Cap. So this here is called 4 o'clocks. I don't know the scientific name, but you can see some of the flowers are still open. It opens in the evening, and this plant is for, I planted it for the moths. It's the food plant for the sphinx moth, which I did see a sphinx moth hanging out on my screens over in the front earlier this summer, and I'm hoping that it ate my plant here and became a moth from my plant. But this provides nectar for nighttime pollinators, in other words, moths. So it's a great plant to have, and it does beautifully in part shade. So in this section of my side bed, over here I've got Cherokee Sedge, and I planted another one in the spring over there because I love it. It does extremely well in the shade. It's a really nice accent grass. It is native. I understand the birds do eat the seed heads. It's got these pretty little bloom stalks in the spring. They're not big and showy, but they're very attractive. And it's a beautiful accent grass. And I had a hard time finding it. I finally found this one over here. I found it at Buchanan's in the spring, Buchanan's Native Plants. So on over this area, this is all 3 varieties of salvia. I put 3 varieties of salvia in here. And once again, I think everyone knows salvias are great for pollinators, and I see the hummingbirds over here as well as the pollinators and the bees and the butterflies. So this is my salvia bed. And over here is my dwarf Barbados Cherry, another native. And as you can see, it's blooming right now. It's got the prettiest pink blooms on it. It blooms twice a year, so it blooms in the spring and the fall. And after it blooms, these pretty little pink flowers turn into red berries. And the red berries are a favorite of birds. So this is something provides pollen and nectar for the pollinators, and then after that, the berries for the birds. Very easy to grow, and it spreads. So if anyone wants some, I have little shoots popping up. Oh, by the way, this whole plant here came from 2 little shoots that I dug out of the back, because the original one of these is in the backyard. And these 2 little shoots popped up where I didn't want them. So I dug them up and I stuck them here, and this is what I got. So it's very easy to grow. So I'd be happy to share these with anybody too that wants some. Okay, this is my area along the driveway here. And this little grouping here, these are wood orchids. I don't know the scientific name. I think they're native. I'm sorry, I forgot to look it up. But I've had these for many, many years, and they do spread. I have given some of them away. The foliage is very nice, but I'll tell you what I love about them. In the early spring, these are the very first things to bloom, and those little blooms come up out of the ground, even almost before the leaves. And these gorgeous little purple orchids, about that big, are in this area here. And they're just beautiful. And once again, it's a plant that does okay in some shade. So it's a shade plant, and I just wanted to share with that, because if anyone is interested, this is a good plant for shade and for very, very early spring color. Now over here, these are all agapanthus. The agapanthus are really native to South Africa, but they do naturalize here. They do extremely well here. They get big, tall blooms, stalk, and then on top of the stalk is these gorgeous bluish purple flowers, tubular flowers, and the hummingbirds love them, the pollinators love them. So even though they're not native to this area, they do extremely well here, and they do provide food for the pollinators, and they bloom around May. Okay, over here is on the other side of the driveway, and this bush is another Hamelia. It's a different species of Hamelia than the volunteer that came up over there. This one I planted, and I planted it specifically for the hummingbirds. At the time, I wanted hummingbirds in the yard, and this plant is, once again, it's not native to this area. It's native to Mexico and Central America, but it does extremely well here. It has come back after every single freeze, and as you can see, even right now, it's covered in bees, and I see all kinds of honeybees and native bees and the hummingbirds. Hummingbirds love this thing. In fact, my neighbor told me that one time when he walked out here to get his mail, he counted 12 hummingbirds zipping around this bush during migration. So it is a great pollen and nectar source. And this here, this vine, this is a trumpet vine, and it is a native. Oh, there's a couple flowers, they're not quite open. It is a native. It's very aggressive. It was here when we moved in. I left it here for the hummingbirds because they love it too. But it is very aggressive and it will spread. So I'm constantly clipping trumpet vines from everywhere. But if you have a space where it can grow wild, it's a super plant and the pollinators love it. So this area is on the other side of the driveway, and this here is a grouping of white-mouth dayflower, and it came up all by itself as a volunteer, and when I first saw it coming up, I thought, well, I'm going to let that grow and see what happens. Then I found out what it was, and it of course has filled in and spread, and as you can see right now, it is a magnet for pollinators. It's a native, and it does spread. I've had to pull it up in other places. But frankly, I love it, and I think it's great right here. And just another quick mention, this down here, horse herb, this has come in all by itself, and this is such a shady area back here that the grass has a hard time growing, so I kind of let whatever wants to grow here, and the horse herb has filled in. So I think it's a great ground cover, and it's a native, and it's doing extremely well. And over here is my giant milkweed. Once again, not a native, but it is native to Central and South America. This is an amazing plant because the leaves are so big that I can feed a lot of monarch caterpillars, especially in the spring when they come through and lay their eggs. And I have lots of caterpillars. I take them inside because if I don't, they get eaten by lizards, frogs, wasps, you name it. They don't make it much past the second instar before they disappear. So when I find them, I do take them in to raise them, and this plant provides a tremendous amount of food. They'll eat the tropicals to the bone, and I won't have any food left over there. So now that I have this one, I'm thrilled, and I actually grew this from a cutting from a friend, and it's not the prettiest plant, but it's very functional, and I love it. So in this bed, this is one of my new changes this spring because of the freeze, and there were some old builder standard bushes in here which I couldn't wait to get rid of, and so we ripped those out and I put in the native beauty berries, which I just have always loved. These are brand new in the spring, so they're just starting to grow, but they did have a few little blooms on them, so you can see how pretty those purple berries are. And I'm counting on next spring having these things full of purple berries. But the beauty berries are native, and when they do bloom, I've got white ones over here that I've had for years, and when they do bloom, the pollinators the bees are just all over them, all over them. I did find out, I took a native landscaping class in this past spring, and they told us from the Native Plant Society, they told us that the white beauty berries are actually from China, which I did not know. But I've got the white ones, and honestly, the pollinators love them just as much. The birds, mostly I see mockingbirds will come eat the berries in the fall, but I'm looking forward to having this bank of purple berried beauty berries here next year. Okay, we're in the backyard now, and I just wanted to point out my inland sea oats because I just think they're so pretty. And this is a lovely native grass that does well in dappled shade. And I used to have a lot more of it in here, but it's kind of been taken over by some other things. But just to show you how pretty it can be, and you can fill an area with the inland sea oats. The other thing I added back here a few years ago is the pipe vine. And this is the ground cover style pipe vine, the native. And this is the host plant for the pipe vine swallowtail butterfly. And I do get pipe vine caterpillars back here, which is a lot of fun. I love to take them in and raise them inside, just like the monarchs. And so an important food source. And the really cool, if you've never seen a pipe vine flower, I don't know if you can get in here and see this. They're just a really interesting looking little flower. Okay, we're moving across the backyard here, and this little area I cleared out because I wanted to have a native milkweed area, and I planted the perennis because those are the ones that can tolerate some shade. And as you can see, they're doing extremely well, and these have they were all eaten off earlier, so I have a lot of stems that were eaten by caterpillars. The butterflies come through here and they lay lots of eggs, and then I take them in and raise them. But this bed is doing very well right here. And just a quick mention, this is more giant Turks Cap behind me. And actually I cleared some of that giant Turks Cap out to put this in. But you can see here, here they are, they're just starting to bloom. Oh, I just pulled that off. They're just starting to bloom, and they got lots of buds on them, and they will be blooming all winter and providing a lot of nectar to hummingbirds and bees. Okay, moving along through the backyard, I just wanted to point out I have a Savannah Holly here, which is also native to North America. And the beauty of this one is it blooms in the spring, but it gets these berries, and they're going to turn orange here soon. Right now they're green, but they're going to turn orange, and they provide food for the birds throughout the winter. And what typically will happen is in the spring, we have flocks of cedar waxwings that move through Sugarland. You probably have seen them. But the cedar waxwings will come in the spring, and they will clean the berries off this tree. So that's a lot of fun when they come. Also, along this bank of bushes here, we've planted a number of wax myrtles. And wax myrtle is also another native bush, which obviously does extremely well. And it gets tiny little berries that are not very pretty, but the birds love them. They turn gray in the winter. The berries turn gray. And I always have warblers. All winter long, I have warblers coming, picking those berries off of the wax myrtle bushes. Okay, moving on further back. This is another one of my new experimental areas, post-freeze. I dug some stuff out of here that I didn't want anymore, and I wanted to put in natives. So I chose this rock rose, and it's a native prairie plant, and it has done extremely well here. It has been blooming constantly ever since, when did I put it in? March or April? It has been blooming constantly. It has grown. I'm going to have to cut it back this winter, but this is a real hit. And I see pollinators all over it all the time. So this is a great plant. Love it. Here's my original Barbados cherry, and it actually has migrated around the house. It actually started in the further back here, but you can see it's just lovely the way it drapes and blooms. It really doesn't have enough space in this spot, but it's if you have more space for it, it drapes and blooms beautifully. And just another quick note, this entire backyard when we moved in was St. Augustine. There was nothing back here. Not a bush, not a flower, nothing. So this has been a work of love for 27 years. Okay, we have now reached the far back corner of my yard. And back here I planted this Almond Verbena, which at the time I planted it, I thought it was native, but it's not. It's actually native to Argentina. But the reason I picked it out is because when I saw it, it was at Jason's Native Plants. When I saw it, they had a bunch of these and they were covered in pollinators. They were just covered in bees. And I said, I have to have that. So I put it back here, and it is a great pollinator plant, and it smells heavenly. These tiny little white flowers, I don't know if you can see them up there. Tiny little white flowers, they attract pollinators and they just smell heavenly. So it's really a lovely plant, and it is good for the pollinators even though it's not native to Texas. It does need some sun, which is why it reaches up to the sun here. The lower branches don't really bloom much, but the upper branches do. So over here, this dear poor thing is it's actually two Glossy Abelias. These were one of the first bushes we planted, and I hate to show it to you now because it looks so bad, but I'm telling you, in the spring it's beautiful. It gets covered in these beautiful little white pinkish flowers, and once again, early spring, it's great for the pollinators. In early spring, it is a native. I think it gets too much shade back here, which is, I think, why it kind of peters out at the end of the summer. But in the spring, I see hummingbirds coming to it and all kinds of pollinators, and it is lovely when it blooms. And I think if it were in a sunnier area, it wouldn't look so sickly right now. But it's a lovely plant. It's a Glossy Abelia. Oh, and just real quick, this is another project this spring. I planted some more pipe vine under here for my pipe vine swallowtails. More pipe vine. So it's going to grow out. I'm counting on it growing out and filling in this entire area with ground cover. So that is the tour of my garden. In closing, I just wanted to say that this has been a labor of love for 27 years. It's a journey. It's not a final destination. When we first moved in, we had mostly St. Augustine grass, and we had little tiny beds in front of the house, builder standard. We had azaleas and, you know, the stupid builder standard bushes that they put in. So over time, I've worked my vision, and my vision is, and my goal is, to every time I choose a plant, I want to choose a plant that's primarily native if possible, but even more so than that, a plant that has some kind of wildlife value. Every plant I choose needs to either provide pollen and nectar for pollinators, seeds for birds, or berries for birds. And that's how I try to do it. I think you saw my certification signs at the beginning. I have the National Wildlife Federation certification, and I have the more stringent bird-friendly certification. And I've been tracking the birds in my yard over the years, and to date I have identified 50 species of bird just in my little plot of land here. I don't count them if I see them at the end of the street, which I saw some cool warblers this spring down at the end of the street, but I didn't count those. I only count the birds that I actually see in my yard. So it's suburbia. I don't have a big yard, but anybody can do it in any plot of land that you have. And thank you for visiting with me in my garden today.